Good evening. My name is Jason Wallace. I'm the pastor of Christ Presbyterian Church here in the Salt Lake Valley, and we welcome you to another installment of the Ancient Paths. Before we get started this evening, I wanted to go through a few things with you. We had a debate this past Saturday. We're going to be talking about that in a moment. We have another debate coming up a week from Friday. That'll be November 7th at 7 p.m. in the Orson Spencer Hall Auditorium. We're going to be having a debate that I'll be debating Martin Tanner from KSL's Religion Today on the subject of whether the Bible is in accord with the LDS scriptures, most particularly the Book of Mormon. Admission to that is free and hope you can join us for that. We meet Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. at 8630 West, 2700 South, and also 5:30 p.m. on Sunday evenings. We have a mission work up in Logan, meets at 6:30 at 1315 East, 700 North in the Faith and Fellowship Center, and hope you can visit with us soon. We had an interview last week that there was just so much that we were trying to cover that we decided we would carry it over to this week. And so hopefully that will give us a chance to flesh things out a little bit more. We have with us Joel Layton, the president of the Atheist of Utah. He is the president and director. He and his organization were co-sponsors of a debate that we had this past Saturday. The church was also a co-sponsor, and it was on the subject of God and politics. Should our religion influence our political thought? That debate went well, and we have one of the participants with us, Mr. Mark Howsam. Mr. Howsam is a PhD candidate at the University of Wales. He is a ruling elder in our congregation. He has debated a number of different subjects, most particularly with David Keller, with whom he's done, I think, 3 debates now. So we're going to be talking about atheism in general. We were doing basically a lead-in to the debate last time, but I wanted to come back and talk about the philosophical nature of atheism and how it contrasts with Christianity. And so, Mr. Layton, very good to have you back with us.
I'm glad to be here.
Now, one of the things that I saw in the interview that we had last week versus the debate on Saturday is that you seem to take more of a line like Richard Dawkins as opposed to David Keller. Keller seems to try to argue a more pluralistic position, that he sees that all manner of faith should be excluded from any kind of political discourse because he believes that it's not egalitarian. Mm-hmm. And he was trying to argue for everyone being at the table, so to speak, and that religious language excludes people from that. But in the conversation that we had, you seem to be taking a much more exclusivist position, like Richard Dawkins, in terms of you're not trying to limit the type of dialogue. You're actually arguing for a specific position to the exclusion of others. Would you believe that be fair to characterize it that way?
Oh yeah, certainly to an extent. Yeah, I can see that, what you're saying there.
I mean, Dawkins, you sounded like you were in accord with him last week in terms of pushing for the state to view religious instruction of children by their parents to be viewed as a form of child abuse. Mm-hmm. You would see that as something the state should step in and prevent. It's not simply a matter of pluralism. You're actually arguing for something that is a true. You're not arguing for nothing being really true. You're arguing for this being exclusively true, right?
Well, I mean, as far to the extent that is child abuse, I mean, certainly many European countries think that spanking your child is child abuse, and they have actually laws against it. And do I want to see it to that extent? And I don't want to see children taken away from their parents for this manner. But what I would like to see is that parents not be totally restricted to only teaching one book.
So what if those parents are convinced that there is truth and that they're to train their children up in that, then would the state use its power to prevent that
Well, it's like
and come in and take the children away?
only if it becomes extremist. I mean, certainly, I mean, if you look at white supremacists in Idaho, they're teaching racism to their children. That's pretty extreme. If it gets to that point, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't understand why all families would not want to be able to open the minds of their children to the fullest extent that they can.
You've alluded to something I wanted to try to flesh out a little bit, because it seems as if in a lot of the atheist argumentation that I hear, there's an immediate jumping to a caricature, to an extreme. That one of the quotes that came off your organization's website was actually the quote for the day last week when we did the interview. We didn't have a chance to get to it. You said, "Give a man a fish and you'll feed him for a day. Give him a religion and he'll starve to death while praying for a fish." How many Christians have you known that have starved to death praying for fish?
Well, you might be used to taking the literal portion of the Bible totally literally. I mean that.
But I mean,
that's just somewhat of a parable and somewhat facetious.
I understand, but there's a caricaturization taking place of Christians as at best naive. We talked about some of Dawkins' language, that people are either ignorant, they are stupid, or they're wicked. And he didn't like to talk about them being wicked, but basically people who are in disagreement with Darwinism, mm-hmm. as saying that life came from inorganic matter through totally naturalistic processes. If you disagree with that, then you're either ignorant, you're stupid, or you're wicked.
I think there was one more.
Insane.
Insane was the other one, yes.
Insane.
He didn't want to go with the wicked part of it.
Right.
That does seem extremist, and the fallacy you're doing here is that all four of those categories are an insult. Ignorance is not necessarily an insult. I'm ignorant. Will Rogers said, we're all ignorant, only on different subjects.
Understood.
What Dawkins' point would be, and that if you totally taught yourself evolution and all aspects of it, you would have to actually choose to oppose the obvious evidence. I mean, I think that is the point he's going for. He isn't trying to insult you.
Okay, well, we'll get to that point. But I think there's an arrogance that the position I hear from atheists is we have a corner on the market to reason and to logic, and that there's a fundamental irrationality to any kind of religion. And the jumping to the white supremacist as the example, I see people protesting, claiming that religion is the root of all evil. Dawkins actually did a BBC special by that title. Mm-hmm. And people were holding up signs saying that religion was the source of all terrorists and things like this. I mean, do you really, what's the distinction that you make? I teach my children historic, biblical, Orthodox Christianity. Our statement of faith is the Westminster Confession of Faith, which has just defined the Presbyterian understanding of things for 3.5 centuries. Would you want the state to view that as child abuse? And if not, why?
Maybe that is extremist, that to call it child abuse. I just think that children should be able to, like I said, have open minds about everything, and you can't do that if you only teach them one path, one ancient path, if you may. But if you only teach them one path, in a way, yeah, you've stifled the creative mind, the critical thinking mind.
Do you believe that religious people totally ignore people who disagree with them, or do you think that they can actually critically engage them?
I think they engage them rather close-mindedly.
But now you have a view of reality as well, and you would believe that it would be good to teach children that playing with fire is not a good thing, right?
Yes, that's kind of a natural instinct thing, though.
Well, it may not be enough of a natural instinct to keep them from burning the house down around them, as we find out in the news from time to time. But fire is not evil in itself, but there are limitations that you put on a child. You wouldn't want them just free ranging out into the interstate or playing with fire or with poisons or things like this. There are things there's a reality that they have to deal with, correct?
Yes, very much so. Emphasis on the reality part.
I actually appreciate your position more than unfortunately, a lot of atheists jump back and forth between a pluralism where they're saying we are not claiming exclusivity. I can't talk tonight, but they're saying, we're pluralistic. You're the dogmatic ones. You're the narrow ones. You're claiming that you have the absolute truth, and that's bigoted. But then they make this very same claims for themselves. You're actually making a claim for truth, and you're saying that excludes other positions, right?
I'm making a claim to go out and seek. I mean, beware the man of one book is the philosophy that I live by.
And what if there is one book that is true?
I have yet to see one. Okay,
I want to flesh that out because I think there's you agree that there's truth in terms of dealing with the reality of poisons, of fire, of things in physical realm, but you seem to presume that there's no logical, there's an a priori elimination of any truth in the spiritual realm, of any kind of moral or ethical standards. I mean, do you recognize that you seem to be excluding that from the beginning?
Exclusionary is, I don't know, it's subjective there. I don't think that you need any kind of supernatural thing to keep your kids from going into fire or poison or what have you.
No, I'm talking about, I think that there is a spiritual danger in terms of children believing that doing whatever they feel like is a good thing. Children are going to feel like doing things that are destructive to them. Kids may feel like taking drugs, but it enslaves them. It destroys them. Kids may feel like not eating their vegetables, but it will cause them to be malnourished and possibly sick and die. Kids may feel like doing things that are not helpful to them. And so there are ethical and moral issues that are involved there. I mean, would you disagree with that, or?
No, I don't disagree with that part of it, but I don't see that teaching God is necessary to follow suit with teaching them, the natural world.
You seem to assume that there is no God. How would you know if there was a God in the system that you adopt? Because it seems that you have adopted a system that presumes a naturalistic explanation for everything from the beginning, and therefore there is no way you would ever, you say, well, there's no proof for God, but your whole system fundamentally denies the existence of God from the beginning.
Actually, that's incorrect. I don't think that, that is a hard atheist stance to deny, actually say that they know that there is no God. I mean, that is the total opposite of those, and there are more, if I can get it out here, there are many more Christians who claim to absolutely know that there is a God than you'll ever find atheists that say that they absolutely know that there is no God. I do not believe there is a God, and I live my life as if there were none.
But you're also seeking to impose that view of the world on other people through saying that religious instruction should be viewed as child abuse, and that we talked about the position on stem cell research. You're seeking to take people's money against their will and have it spent on things that they disagree with because they believe there is a God. They believe that the life of a child is protected by that God. It's been created by Him, and it is a sin to kill that child. But then you but you have no problem imposing that. So I mean, you're working with a certainty that you're imposing on other people, right?
No, I'm trying to get people to open their own minds. Certainly most Christian people, probably the Muslims as well. I don't know about the Eastern religions and everything like that. They do want to put that definition out of their interpretation of this 2,000-year-old manuscript here. And I just don't see it. I don't. You keep talking about the child, and I'm talking about, you can open your Bible there, pick out a sentence, and at the end of that sentence is a period. And if you slice that period about 8 ways, that 1/8 of that little thing is the amount of cells that we're talking about. And we're not talking about extracting them from a human womb. We're talking about those that are already in a petri dish. How much more respect can you have for life than to be able to take that and produce some incredibly complex medical process that can save lives, save the improvement of life? What God would have a problem with that? And so it takes religion to define that little speck of cells in a petri dish as an unborn child.
But it takes a religion as well to weigh these things and give any kind of absolute value either way, doesn't it? I mean,
No.
we talked about your wife.
Yeah.
You were talking about her, that you wanted to see stem cell research done at on fetal cells because you believe that it would help her with her multiple sclerosis.
Right.
We didn't have a chance to flesh this out. Why do you believe your wife has an absolute value? Now, you value her, other people may value her, but why should she have a value to me or someone else?
Because she is a full-grown human with, feelings. She has a heartbeat. She has brain activity. She has worth. She has. Why should her rights not supersede a few tiny little cells in a petri dish that are going to be discarded anyway, by the way?
But see,
how is that disrespectful to life?
See, here's the problem, though. You're just asserting that she has value, but on what basis does she have value in any absolute sense? Obviously, she has value to you, but why is it that she, who is advanced in age, versus an embryo that has much more time? How do you value these things apart from some religious system? Honestly, I think you have a religious system, but you don't want to admit to it.
I don't have a religious system.
Then how do you assign value in any consistent way at an absolute level? Because there are other societies that would say that your wife doesn't have absolute value. In Nazi Germany, she would have been considered, depending on what state her multiple sclerosis is, she would have been considered a useless eater. And they were arguing on the basis of Darwinism that people like this were a tax on society, and that they thought obvious to anyone that looked around them that this life was not worth valuing to society, and therefore they should introduce a good death, euthanasia. That's the etymology of the word, and they introduced it, and people like Margaret Sanger, the president, the founder of Planned Parenthood, cheered them back in the 30s for what they were doing, because she thought that this was the elimination of religion standing in the way of the improvement of the species. That she thought that compassion and religion and all these different things were getting in the way of the survival of the fittest. So how would you argue with that? Because these are people from the very same worldview that you adopt. How do you tell them, no, you're wrong, she does have value in an absolute sense, apart from some religious conviction, without just making a gratuitous assertion because I say so?
Well, the thing is you're talking about all human life as having some kind of worth. And somebody pointed out to me that when anybody gets desperate, they always go back to Nazi Germany, or their comparison to Hitler. A Hitler who was Christian,
Well,
by the way.
Really? How would you argue that?
That Hitler was Christian?
Yes.
He claimed to be. He was
Did he-
Catholic.
he
had a Catholic background.
Then why is it that he by force removed the crosses from the church, put the swastika in? Why is it that he argued not from the Bible, but from Nietzsche, and basically took a Darwinian atheistic view, tried to mix it with the Aryan concept that he brings in from Hinduism, and mixes all that together? I mean, I think
I don't know. I'll bring some stuff.
I would challenge
I'll
you.
email you some stuff. There are plenty of things. There are plenty of historical documents and quotations and letters from his generals that will attest to him claiming to be Catholic.
I've read the subject. You're making a false assertion.
I think.
The History Channel actually did a whole show based on this blending of sort of a Darwinian view of things with a nationalism, and then they bring in this sort of supernatural kind of mixture of almost Norse mythology with what they get out of Hinduism, because they get the Aryanism, the caste system, which is based on color, and it's not Christian at all. In fact, they end up locking up the Christians that oppose them.
Oh, I agree. It's not very Christian or Christian-like, but I can guarantee you, Adolf Hitler claimed to be Christian.
Well, he also
prayed.
He also,
and the Pope never stood up and went against him.
Well, I mean, I could make the assertion that Saddam Hussein is a Roman Catholic, but making the assertion and proving it are two different things. And I think that you need to research that more.
I will.
So
I'll do that, and I think you need to research it more. I think you're missing over some pretty damning evidence that he
the whole confessing church movement was locked away because they were standing for biblical Christianity against Adolf Hitler. But I mean, you're the one that said that it's only in desperation that people appeal to Hitler. You're doing it yourself, but the reason I appeal to it is because I believe it's a consistent view. Mm-hmm. He argued from a Darwinian standpoint that he takes the health of the individual, the survival of the fittest individuals, and basically then brings it into a communal sense, and says that the community must weed out these less fit members of society. So let's go back to the question: how do you argue that your wife, if you were living in Nazi Germany, where they were euthanizing people with chronic diseases such as multiple sclerosis, how do you argue that it is morally wrong? Because that's what seemed to be what you were doing, is you're arguing that she has absolute value, not that you value her individually, but there is something that transcends that. How?
And as opposed to putting God onto it, I'm missing your point. I truly am.
How do you argue that your wife has value in any absolute sense? I mean, you can say that you value her. I can say that I value my dog. how do you differentiate? You know, we may have feelings about something, but you're not claiming just feelings. You're claiming there's something that is true, that is real, like we were talking about with the poisons, with the, you know, child wandering into traffic. We're not talking about abstract concepts. We're talking about reality. Unless you're just expressing your feelings. I mean, is that all you're doing when you say that? I mean, if you were standing there and they were about to execute your wife, would you say that, well, I feel you shouldn't be doing this? Or are you telling them it's wrong?
I'm telling them that they are infringing. I mean, they're right and wrong is a rather subjective as well. I mean, atheists do have a sense of what you want to call right and wrong.
But you were making comparative values between her and an unborn child.
Now you keep going back to that unborn child. I don't think it's an unborn child. And you keep saying, you said an embryonic research. We're not talking about embryonic cells. We're not even talking about a zygote. We're before the zygote. We're long before that. What's the
Blastocyst.
Blastocyst. Before that, we're way back there. I'm talking from a scientific standpoint. What represents human life?
You're not arguing from a scientific standpoint. You're arguing from a moral standpoint. I want to bring Mark in.
Yeah, we do exclude you. We excluded you all last week.
We've been leaving you out a bit here. Is he making a scientific, a purely rational argument, or is he making a religious argument?
In terms of claiming that
his wife has
absolute
value? Yes.
If the claim is, I agree. If the claim is more than just that there's feelings, you know, that it's just I value my wife, you value your wife, and somebody else might value their spouse, or perhaps they might value their dog more than their spouse, and since people value different things, there has to be some kind of account of that. There has to be an evidence presented for why we should regard someone with absolute value. So I think that's the question you're getting at, is what is your basis for saying that a person has absolute value? So if you make a comparison between the blastocyst and a full-grown person, what is the basis for saying that besides the full-grown person is more important to you, more valuable to you, what's the basis for saying that full-grown person absolutely, objectively has more value than a blastocyst or a rock, or because in an atheistic view, people are just advanced electrochemical machines, basically the same fundamental substance as the rest of the universe. So why not value a galaxy more than a person, or a star more than a person? What's the basis of putting some kind of objective value on human life?
Over
over
inanimate objects?
At all, or over anything?
I mean, that's what we're talking here, is basically you want to define when human life begins.
Well, in this case,
human life does have, value.
But what's the basis of saying that? I mean, if human beings come about by accident, in an atheistic worldview, there's matter and energy, there's the Big Bang, energy differentiates, eventually you get matter, stars form, planets form, and then by accidental processes you get the development of life, and then through random mutations and accidents you finally get human beings.
So what's the big fallacy? Now, you told me the other day that you understood evolution, and by
I know that natural selection is involved,
accidents, it's evolution is just the opposite of accidents.
What
There's nothing accidental about evolution.
I'm contrasting accident with design, as opposed. I know that natural selection creates a guiding process in evolution in that view, but what I mean is that it's unplanned, it's undesigned, it's purposeless in the sense there's no purposer who is doing it, who is creating human life for a purpose. And human beings are electrochemical machines that have come about by impersonal, unplanned processes. So what is the basis for saying that a human being has more objective value, more absolute value than a rock or a galaxy or anything else?
I have no response to that. I really don't.
And see, we asked last week the question, how Darwinism argues that you begin with a single self-replicating, simple life form. And then you go from that to us today, through time and natural selection.
A lot of time.
But you weren't able to answer the question, how did that cell come into existence out of inorganic matter? And I think the answer you gave was time and random processes. Eventually a cell is going to pop out of all that. But you don't know how. From our standpoint, you have a naive epistemology in atheism. You claim rationality. You claim that you're following logic. But how do you know the basic facts that then go into those syllogisms? How do you know what's real? How do you know what's true?
Well, we base our thinking on evidence.
Okay, but how do you...
And there is no evidence that was even remotely suggest something supernatural.
But you're beginning with some borrowed epistemology, which I'll flesh out in a minute. But your whole system presumes that there must be a naturalistic explanation, correct?
Yes, based on evidence seen so far.
So how would you ever know if there's a God? Because your whole system, it's a paradigm that you're putting everything into a naturalistic worldview. And anything that doesn't fit that, you say, well, that's not scientific. I mean,
Well, yes, I know, but we have absolutely no reason to conclude, because we haven't gotten the answer scientifically, therefore it must be supernatural.
Well, here's the problem. What are the proper limits of the scientific method? Can science reveal a God from a naturalistic set of presuppositions? I mean, if someone said, history proves there's no God, now obviously they're interpreting history. There are no brute, uninterpreted facts. They're looking at history and they say, well, there's evil in the world. There's all these other things. They're bringing certain assumptions to their interpretation of history. Can science prove or disprove the existence of a God? I think that it can point to that, but there are natural limits on the whole scientific method as a basis of knowledge. Science works with certain presuppositions that you can't prove, and I don't think you understand that there are things that you're presuming. You're presuming that when you're making your reason, you said last week your father didn't teach you what to think; he taught you how to think. Mm-hmm. But how do you know what's real to put into those things? You're presuming things are real. You're presuming that what your perceptions actually accord with reality. That, sometimes the examples given in religion of people, the blind men feeling an elephant. I don't know if you mentioned that one last week or if it was someone else that mentioned it, but I think that atheism does the same thing. It presumes, but it can't prove these things. And there's a naive epistemology. There's no sense of how do we know what we know, other than just say, well, we know. We know that...
But science never says that.
Well, no, I'm not saying science says it. I'm saying atheism says it. Science can't say that because there's natural limits on what science can and can't do. The scientific method can establish connections. You can make a hypothesis, and you can have a method of falsification and things like this.
Exactly.
But atheism has no method of falsification. So what are you saying that atheists? What are you saying that atheists claim to know that they don't have any evidence for? Could you give some specific examples of that?
They assume that everything came about and it continues and will continue solely on the basis of naturalistic processes.
So what would be the basis of that?
And how do you think we came to that conclusion?
I think it's a gratuitous assertion. I think it's a leap
I
that
don't
you
think
can't
it's a
prove
leap at all. I think it's
How do you-
based on the evidence we have gotten so far.
How do you prove? But see, it's a circular argument. You're assuming that there's only naturalistic causes, and that therefore, since whatever occurs, you establish what you think may be some correlation to some process, then you assume that proves it. But it's a circular argument where you're presuming a naturalistic system that's closed off from God. And I would argue that you're arguing from that most atheists, and I think that what you've said, you're arguing from an old positivist position where religion is seen as filling in the God of the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that whole understanding of history has been discredited through people like Thomas Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolutions. He's the man who coined the phrase paradigm shift. We don't have this grand grid that's being filled in with all these little naturalistic explanations, and eventually we're going to drive God out completely. Rather than what we have, and Kuhn was not a Christian. Kuhn was arguing as a philosopher of science and history that what you have is revolutions. You have the Copernican paradigm, which did away with the old Ptolemaic view. Copernicus gets done away with by Newton. Newton gives way to Einstein. And you have not filling in the gaps with naturalistic explanations. You have a whole new paradigm. And there's an understanding there are no uninterpreted facts. But most atheists that I know, they assume that they know what's real because they know what's real. And they assert a morality, but they can't give a basis for it. Now, Mark, am I being? Maybe you can bring some clarity.
Okay. Let me.
He can mediate between
Let me say
us
something on your behalf and see what you think. I think that the atheist position would say that there needs to be positive evidence to believe something, which is something I would agree with also, and that basically the methodological naturalism of science flows from observation of history, of things that go on, and observing that supernatural claims don't hold up to evidence. So when there's supernatural claims made and they're tested, they turn out to have non-supernatural explanations, or not to require the supernatural to explain them. And so positively there is no evidence in our experience that there exists a supernatural being, and therefore there's no basis for believing in it. We should remain agnostic, even, and lean towards the negative side on it. Say, if just like someone were to claim to me, well, in the center of Mars there live fairies who control the solar system's movements, then I'm going to say, where's your evidence for that? And if they can't give it to me, then I have a right to say, I'm going to disregard your belief until you can present something positive. Would that be a fair
That's actually a pretty
statement
good,
of your position?
That's a pretty good way of looking at it.
And then how would you respond?
And so we all know the fairies are on Jupiter. Come on.
Right. Well, I think that's a very fair criteria, because it is true that if there's no evidence for something, we have no basis for believing in it. But I think that there is evidence for the existence of God. I think the universe can't be explained apart from the existence of God. I think God can be deduced from the existence of the universe, like Paul alludes to this in the book of Romans. The Creator is known from the things that are made. So I think rather than looking for, some kind of amazing thing to happen, like some kind of psychic power to be proven or something like that, rather all the facts of existence indicate the need for God to explain them. So I would answer that it's almost like the atheist position misses the proof for God because it's so evident. It's so much everywhere that they're looking for specific instances of miracles or something. Rather, they should just be looking at the basic facts of existence, and that God can be deduced from those.
And to give you a little better articulation of what I see are the problems, you have the Big Bang itself, which violates all our known laws of physics. You know, how do you go from this infinitely massive tiny singularity to it all of a sudden expanding? We have no idea. I mean, I've never heard anyone who can give anything other than just an extremely speculative theory. Then you have, how do we go from inorganic materials to a cell which is extremely complex, far more complex than Darwin ever fathomed? We don't know, but it must have happened. I mean, it's a leap of faith. You know, one of my arguments would be, not only do we see design, do we see these things, but we see it within ourselves. And I think that the humanity that you display in your concern for your wife, which I think is a noble thing, I would agree with you that your wife does have value. And I would stand there against the Nazis. But I could actually argue from a consistent position. I think there is a basis that your wife has value. And one of the big things, and I hope there are a number of atheists watching tonight, because my great frustration is, like I alluded to earlier on, I hear caricatures where Christianity is going to be compared to fairies living in the middle of Mars, or spaghetti monsters, or things like this. They don't deal with the person and claims of Jesus Christ for what they really are. They try to dismiss all of religion. They blur the lines between someone worshiping the monkey god and going into the temple and putting monkey dung in their hair with Jesus Christ. And I don't think that that's rational to say, well, then, you know, this religion's silly, therefore all religion must be illogical, irrational. We have the corner because we say so. And it's a leap. I think that the open-mindedness that you're calling for, fine, we need to all be open-minded. We need to deal with these claims, because honestly, what I hear from most atheists is an irrationality, a method of argumentation that sounds an awful lot like the fundamentalists they critique. And I'll give you a chance to respond to some of that, but we're going to try to squeeze in a few callers. Sure. If you'd like to join in the conversation, we've run a little bit long here, but the telephone number is 973-TV20. That's 973-8820. We have as our guest this evening Joel Layton, the president and director of the Atheists of Utah, and also Mark Housen, who is a ruling elder in our congregation and an instructor in philosophy at Salt Lake Community College. We have with us Natasha from Ogden. Good to have you with us.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
Not
my
a problem.
question is for actually Mark. Mark, I was wondering if you would be willing to put some of Thomas Aquinas' theistic proofs on the table and see if your guest would be willing to respond to some of those.
Thank you for calling.
All right, let's see. Yeah, okay, so what Natasha is getting at, you know, is I made a claim that you can deduce God from the world. And of course, this is a claim that's made by Christian theologians, philosophers through history, Thomas Aquinas being a major example of that. Yeah, I think, well, the universe is what Thomas Aquinas called contingent. That is, all the aspects of it are coming into being. It's going through time. New reality is constantly appearing all the time around us. And so the question is, where does the being of the universe come from? And if we say, the universe, well, it's just here, but it isn't just here. It's changing. It's going through time. It's all the different parts of it are coming into being and changing all the time. So what is the foundation of the being of the universe? When something comes into being, we look for a cause of it. And it makes no sense to say that there's no cause for the temporal universe that we live in. There has to be some explanation. It can't have just gone on forever temporally, because you can't pass through an infinite amount of time, and there's no explanation for where the causality that exists in the world comes from, unless we suppose that there is some kind of being who is the ground of reality that is self-existent, that has its existence in himself and doesn't need a prior cause to explain him. It's like having you're on the 24th floor of a tower, and you say, oh look, we're on the 24th floor. Well, why is that being held up? Well, it's the 23rd floor is below it. But then you get down to the bottom. What's there? Does it never end? The tower goes down infinitely? In that case, nothing is supporting the tower, because none of the floors they're always supported by something else. And so there's nothing that actually gives an explanation why the tower is there. If there's nothing at the bottom, it's just floating in the air. So there has to be something that is outside of time, that is uncaused, that doesn't come into being, that doesn't change, that can be the ground of the being of the universe. There's one aspect of it.
Yeah, and that is pretty deep. And Thomas Aquinas, of course, was the first one that I know of that he came up with the first cause argument. But
well, he wasn't the first, but he kind of popularized it.
He kind of put it together. He kind of
Aristotle actually.
It goes quite a ways back. Yeah.
But Thomas Aquinas is kind of one to give it the first cause title expression. They always certainly attribute it to him most often. Mm-hmm. But everyone knows an atheist's perspective of that is that it just seems like a fallacy of logic to say that everything has a cause.
Everything that comes into being or changes has a cause. Would be more accurate there. Not everything has a cause.
Obviously, because religions don't believe that God has a cause. And we're saying, well, if everything that's come into being has a cause, then why not God? And what caused God? Mm-hmm. And we've talked about the concept that if God existed, one thing he probably would be agnostic. You could walk up to God and say, do you know if someone created you? And he would probably say, I can't say for sure.
And see, I think that's putting God into a box of people's very limited understanding, trying to make God into something they can understand.
And it ignores the argument too, because I mean the point of the argument is that you have to have a ground of being, because if an analogy that's been used, and I'll do this quickly. If you have, let's say you got a group of 5 people, and they're all borrowing a marker, and they're handing the marker back and forth to each other, and so finally one of them goes, hey Bob, I'm going to give you your marker back. Oh, it's not mine, it belongs to Steve over here. And Steve says, no, it's not mine, it belongs to Janet. And eventually they go through the 5 people, and none of them owns the marker. There's a problem there. If there's nobody from the outside, they shouldn't have a marker, because none of them own it. So they've all borrowed it from nobody. And the same thing, if all the aspects of the universe, they get their being from previous things, each moment derives its being from a previous moment. If there's nothing that owns being, nothing that's self-existent, that's uncaused, if everything has a cause, then there's no reason why anything exists, because there's no place where the being can come from. It's like we're borrowing our being from previous causes, but nothing owns it. It doesn't come from anywhere. It's just, so why is it there at all? So that's why there has to be something uncaused, something that doesn't know existence, something else at the foundation of the universe.
See, and I don't think that there does have to be. If you can easily believe that God has always been here, I can just as easily believe that matter, time, and space have always been here. It's just easy to imagine.
But see, you fault us for saying that that's a leap of faith for us, but it's just as much a leap of faith for you.
No, I would say it's much more.
But the problem is
much more, because ours is consistent with how we live our lives and how, we assign value. We live as if there's purpose. Robin Williams in the Dead Poets Society, made the famous speech. He said, "We and all we do are nothing more than food for the worms. Therefore, seize the day." And that's appealing to a lot of people, because it's the freedom of atheism that nothing much matters. But it's an inconsistent statement, we believe, because why seize the day? And actually, in the story, one of the students ends up committing suicide, I believe, somewhat being consistent with view. If we and all we do are nothing more than food for the worms, how does it not lead to nihilism?
I'm here to say that I'm here to prove it, because I'm here. I've never ever believed in God. I've been atheist since conception.
And we don't have a problem
And
with that.
I am a good person.
By whose standard?
The 500 people that I send this email out, they are all very good people. They are.
But see, you're making a value judgment on a system that you're simply asserting without any logical basis for asserting that they are good people. Or by whose standard? Why is it better to help a little old lady across the street rather than push her in front of the bus? And I'm not saying that your people are pushing her in front of the bus. But we have a basis on which to argue that. You're just asserting it. You're making a leap.
But the end result is all the same or possibly better. See, I live my life, I don't put constructs of right and wrong. More so, I put on there of consideration and inconsiderate of other people's rights.
But see, you keep switching that because you want to impose that the state's going to view as child abuse, religious instruction in general was the thing before. Mm-hmm. You want to impose on other people that our money should be taken from us by the police power of the state, whether we like it or not, and used to fund things that you think are good. Because you say, whether we agree with it or not, it is good, it has a value. And so there's an inconsistency there.
In other words, there's no basis for value, is the idea.
I don't want to be unfair. I'd like to squeeze in. We've got a couple minutes let me squeeze in a few calls here. Karen, we're running really short on time. If you could make it brief. I apologize for the shortness.
Okay. Well, since you were talking about things being funded, one of the questions or the statements I had was, you were talking about stem cells, mm-hmm. and there are, of course, lots of embryos every year which are disposed of because people are no longer going to use those for implantations, for pregnancies. They have already had their numbers of children, and I've never thought that there would be anything wrong to use those for stem cell research. I am a Christian, and I see nothing wrong with that. I do not see this as being, we've always designated life to be that with when brain waves, we declare people to be deceased in hospitals when brain waves stop.
Well, you're asserting that, but on what basis do you find, where do you find that as the threshold to define human life?
Well, that is how we have defined life.
But see, that's a circular argument. We're defining it that way because that's the way we've defined it.
We leave people then...
On what basis do you define it?
Wait a second. Do you feel then that when someone is in the hospital, that we should then just keep the body alive on machines indefinitely?
I think there's a fundamental difference between...
So there isn't. If we declare life to start with brainwaves,
but no,
brainwaves should be our definition. We have to have a legal definition.
But see, you're asserting that, and we've got a couple minutes left that we're not going to have a chance to flesh that out. What I would argue is that someone who is brain dead in the hospital, they may, through mechanical means, be able to keep that person breathing and their heart beating. But that person's brain, if that person is brain dead, they're dead. There's a difference between that and a fertilized egg that is separated from adulthood only by time and nutrition.
Then do you feel that all these laboratories should be prosecuted for murder?
I think that it is a very dangerous thing to commoditize human life. I think that we need...
should we forbid people...
Ma'am, we have to wrap up here, and you're not letting me answer the question that you asked me before. So, I mean, if you want to call back another time, I'll try to answer the question that you had, but I'm not going to have time for you to cut me off and give me other questions without hearing the first one. So I'll go ahead and answer. I think that when we begin to treat human life as a commodity, we begin to open the door to not only ending the life at the very beginning, but also to then move beyond that. Barack Obama, candidate for president, actually spoke very strongly in favor of denying medical care to a child born at full term through a botched abortion. That if the child makes it out of the birth canal alive, it should be allowed to die. And there are people that are, you have children with Down syndrome and things like this that are being allowed to die. As we begin to commoditize these things, we're going to also lose our grip on the other end. One of the fundamental principles of socialized medicine is that the state is going to ration. And I think that people are in for a rude awakening when they find out that their loved ones who have been getting care into their 80s and 90s, all of a sudden they're going to be told, sorry, you're not worth it. So I think that it opens a Pandora's box, as we saw in Germany in the 1930s that led to the 40s and so forth. Well, I'm sorry that we didn't have a chance to flesh out things more than we did. But Joel, very good having you back with us. Appreciate that we were able to discuss these things, because I think that we end up talking past each other too much. Well, we've come to the end. I'm Jason Wallace, Christ Presbyterian Church. Hope you can join us for worship soon. Until next time, wish you God's blessings. Good night.